They told the old janitor to stay out of the veteran's photo. Until the general saw his hands, the old janitor was already kneeling on the gym floor when the photographer told him to move. Arthur Monroe was 79 years old, with white hair combed flat, a narrow back, and hands so scarred they looked as if life had folded them in the wrong places and never straightened them out. He wore gray work pants, a faded blue shirt with the school name stitched above the pocket, and a ring of brass keys hanging from his belt. Around him, Linden County High School was preparing for its biggest Veterans Night in 40 years. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the bleachers. A student choir stood beneath the basketball scoreboard. 8 empty chairs sat near the stage, each one covered with a white cloth and a folded flag. In the center of the gym, a banner read, "Welcome home our heroes." Arthur had put that banner up himself at 6 in the morning. He had also set the chairs, straightened the flags, and checked the microphone twice. Now, while the county judge, the school board, and a line of decorated veterans gathered for a photo, Arthur was wiping a small black mark from the polished floor. The photographer lowered his camera. "Sir, can you step out of the shot?" Before Arthur could answer, Caleb Morris hurried across the gym with a clipboard in one hand and a wireless headset clipped to his ear. Caleb was 34, sharp-suited, clean-shaven, and newly hired by the district to make the event look professional. He gave Arthur a tight smile. "Mr. Monroe, we need the floor clear for the official photo." Arthur nodded and pushed himself slowly to his feet. "I'll be out of your way." Caleb looked at the mop bucket near the bleachers, then at Arthur's shirt. "And maybe wait in the service hallway until the program starts." Arthur's hand closed around the rag. "The veterans section opens in 10 minutes. "Yes," Caleb said. "For veterans." A few people nearby turned their heads. Arthur did not. He looked at the 8 empty chairs near the stage. "I know." Caleb's smile faded. "Then you understand. Tonight is for honored guests. We can't have maintenance staff walking through the background." The words were not shouted. That made them worse. Arthur stood still with the rag in his hand and the brass keys resting against his hip. Then he said, "I just need to make sure those 8 chairs stay where they are." Caleb glanced toward the chairs. "They're decorative." Arthur's eyes remained on them. "No," he said softly. "They are not." Caleb let out a small breath, the kind young men make when they think an old man is being difficult. "Mr. Monroe, please. Not tonight." Arthur folded the rag carefully and placed it on the mop bucket. "All right." He moved toward the service hallway while the photographer raised his camera again. No one in the official photo knew that the man they had just removed from the frame had spent 41 years opening the school doors before sunrise. No one knew he had polished the gym floor after every graduation. No one knew he had fixed the furnace the night a snowstorm nearly canceled a Christmas concert. And no one knew that before Arthur Monroe carried school keys, he had carried wounded men through smoke so thick he could not see his own hands. Arthur stopped just inside the service hallway. From there, he could see the gym without being seen. That was a skill he had learned long ago. The veterans began arriving soon after. Some wore dress uniforms that no longer fit the way they once had. Some wore ball caps with faded embroidery. Some leaned on canes. Some came with wives, sons, daughters, and grandchildren. A few entered alone. Arthur watched every one of them. When an old Marine with a walker reached the side door, Arthur stepped out silently and held it open. "Thank you," the Marine said. Arthur nodded. "Careful on the ramp." The Marine looked at Arthur's hands. "You serve?" Arthur's face did not change. "A little." The Marine smiled faintly. "Most men who say that serve more than a little." Arthur said nothing. He only held the door until the man was inside. Across the gym, Caleb arranged people with the precision of someone setting a dinner table. Donors in front. Board members near the aisle. Veterans with medals closer to the camera. Students in the back unless they were performing. He wanted the night clean. Emotional, but not messy. Patriotic, but not unpredictable. The keynote speaker was the reason for all of it. Lieutenant General Nathaniel Pierce, retired, was coming home for the first time in decades. He had graduated from Lyndon County High School in 1966, gone to war, risen through the ranks, and returned as the most famous man the town had ever produced. His name was on a plaque near the front office. His photo was in a trophy case. His speech had been promoted for weeks. But Arthur Monroe had not come to hear the speech. He had come because of the 8 chairs. At 6:30, a student volunteer named Jacob Ellis pushed a cart of water bottles past the service hallway and nearly dropped one. Arthur caught it before it hit the floor. Jacob blinked. For a second, I didn't even see your hand move. Arthur handed him the bottle. Then it moved right. Jacob was 17, tall, nervous, and wearing a blazer his mother had clearly pressed for the event. Mr. Monroe, he said, lowering his voice, why are there 8 chairs covered in white? Arthur looked toward the stage. For men who couldn't sit in them. Jacob waited for more. Arthur gave him none. A whistle sounded from the entrance. Caleb was waving sharply. Jacob, don't stand there. We need the general's family escorted to the front when they arrive. Jacob hurried off. Arthur reached into his shirt pocket and touched a folded piece of paper no bigger than an index card. The paper was soft from age, creased so many times that it had begun to split along the folds. On it were 8 names. He had written them with a borrowed pencil in a field hospital 54 years earlier. He had never rewritten them. Some things, he believed, should keep the handwriting they were born with. At 7 o'clock, the gym lights dimmed. The choir sang the national anthem. Everyone stood. Arthur stood too, alone in the service hallway, one hand over his heart, the other resting against the wall for balance. His right hand did not lie flat against his chest. It could not. 2 fingers had been broken too many times and healed crooked. A white scar ran from his thumb to his wrist. After the song ended, Caleb stepped into the hallway. Mr. Monroe, I thought I asked you to stay out of sight. Arthur lowered his hand. I was standing for the anthem. I appreciate that, Caleb said, not sounding as though he did. But we have cameras on the side aisle. Arthur looked toward the gym. I'll move back. Caleb noticed the folded paper in Arthur's shirt pocket. What's that? Arthur's hand covered it gently. Names. For maintenance. For memory. Caleb stared at him, then gave a short laugh. Please don't start one of those side conversations with guests tonight. We are on a tight schedule. Arthur's eyes stayed calm. Young man, schedules are good. But they don't outrank the dead. Caleb's face hardened. That kind of comment is exactly what I'm talking about. Jacob, standing nearby with the water cart, heard it and looked down. Arthur did not answer. He had learned long ago that silence could save a man from spending words where they would not land. The program began. The principal welcomed the crowd. The mayor praised sacrifice. A school board member talked about legacy and community. Each speaker used the word honor several times. Arthur listened from the hallway. Every few minutes, his eyes returned to the 8 empty chairs. During the second speech, one of the flags behind the stage slipped loose from its stand and tilted toward the choir. A few people gasped. Caleb looked around in panic. Arthur moved before anyone called him. He crossed the back of the stage quietly, took the pole in one scarred hand, and set it straight with the other. The audience barely noticed. The choir did. Jacob did. So did one old veteran in the second row, who watched Arthur's hands with narrowed eyes. Arthur turned to leave. Caleb intercepted him near the stage steps. That was supposed to be handled by stage crew, Caleb whispered. It was falling. You walked in front of the cameras. Arthur looked at him. The flag stayed up. Caleb's jaw tightened. After this event, we're going to discuss boundaries. Arthur nodded. After this event, I'll mop the gym. The line drew a laugh from a nearby student who quickly covered his mouth. Caleb's cheeks colored. Before he could respond, a murmur rolled through the gym. Lieutenant General Nathaniel Pierce had arrived. He entered through the main doors with his wife, his daughter, and 2 aides. He was 76, tall, silver-haired, and dressed in a dark suit instead of uniform. He walked with a cane, though he carried himself like a man who had spent his life refusing to lean too much on anything. The crowd rose in applause. Caleb's anger vanished into a smile. He hurried forward. General Pierce, welcome home, sir. We are honored. Pierce shook his hand politely, but his eyes were already moving across the gym. The bleachers. The choir. The stage. The empty chairs. Something changed in his face when he saw them. Not surprise. Recognition. Who set those chairs? He asked. Caleb smiled. Our team did, sir. We wanted a visual symbol. Pierce looked at him. A symbol of what? Caleb hesitated. Sacrifice, sir. Pierce's gaze returned to the chairs. There are 8. Yes, sir. Who chose 8? Caleb opened his mouth. No answer came. Arthur, standing half-hidden near the side curtain, heard the question. He looked down. General Pierce saw him. Not fully. Just a glimpse of an old custodian in a blue work shirt, stepping back into shadow. But the general's eyes narrowed. For a moment, the applause faded in his ears. He saw a younger man in a torn medic's vest, crouched under smoke, hands moving fast over a chest wound, saying, "Stay with me, Nate. You can sleep when you're old." Pierce blinked. The gym returned. Who is that man? He asked. Caleb followed his gaze. Oh. That's Arthur Monroe. He's our head custodian. Been here forever. Pierce's grip tightened on his cane. Arthur Monroe? Yes, sir. Wonderful employee. Very dedicated. The general turned slowly. Where did he serve? Caleb gave a polite laugh. I'm not sure he did, sir. Pierce looked at him then, and the warmth left his face. You're not sure. Caleb felt the floor tilt beneath him. I mean, he may have mentioned something. But tonight's program is already set. Pierce did not move toward his front row seat. Bring him here. Caleb glanced toward the stage clock. Sir, your introduction is next. Then introduce me. Later. The aide beside Pierce lowered his head to hide a smile. Caleb walked quickly to Arthur, who was already reaching for the mop bucket to move it out of view. Mr. Monroe, Caleb said, his tone suddenly different, General Pierce would like to see you. Arthur's hand stopped on the mop handle. For the first time that night, uncertainty crossed his face. Nate is here. Caleb stared. Nate? Arthur looked toward the gym. The general was watching him from across the floor. 54 years of silence sat between them. Arthur took one step forward, then stopped and glanced at his shirt. I'm not dressed for this. Caleb said nothing. He had spent the evening deciding who looked like he belonged. Now he had no idea what belonging meant. Arthur walked slowly across the gym. The applause had faded into a thick, curious silence. Cameras swung toward him. Arthur hated that. He kept his eyes on Pierce. The general came forward to meet him before Arthur reached the front row. For several seconds, the two men stood face to face. The whole gym waited. Pierce looked older than Arthur remembered. Arthur supposed he did too. Then the general lowered his gaze to Arthur's hands. The scar was still there. The crooked fingers. The white line across the wrist. Pierce's breath caught. "My God," he whispered. "It is you." Arthur looked at him with the faintest smile. "You got old, Lieutenant." A sound moved through the crowd, half laughter, half shock. Pierce reached for Arthur's right hand with both of his. He did not shake it. He held it. Carefully. As if he were holding something sacred. Then he turned toward the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice unsteady, "the man standing beside me is the reason I came home." The gym went silent. Caleb stood near the stage steps, clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. Pierce kept hold of Arthur's hand. "Most of you know my name because it ended up on plaques and programs. You know my rank because someone printed it beside my photograph. But the man who saved my life has spent more than 40 years fixing lockers, sweeping hallways, and opening this school before sunrise." Arthur looked away. "Nate." Pierce ignored the warning. Not disrespectfully. Gratefully. "I have told this story many times," Pierce said. "But I never knew if the man in it was alive to hear me tell it." He faced the audience. "In 1970, on a ridge we called Crow Valley, my platoon was cut off after an evacuation went wrong. The radio was dead. The landing zone was burning. I had shrapnel in my side and a collapsed lung. I remember a medic crawling toward me through smoke. I remember his hands because they were bleeding worse than mine." Arthur's fingers tightened. Pierce continued. "He tied off one man's leg with a rifle sling. He carried another across open ground. He dragged me by the straps of my vest when I begged him to leave me. And when we reached the creek bed, he went back. No one moved." Pierce looked at the 8 chairs. "He went back 8 times. A woman in the front row covered her mouth." Arthur closed his eyes. Pierce's voice lowered. 8 men did not live to sit in those chairs tonight. But they were not left alone. Not one of them. Sergeant Arthur Monroe made sure of that. The word sergeant moved through the gym like a bell. Caleb's face went pale. Jacob stared at Arthur as if seeing him for the first time. Arthur opened his eyes. "I was a corpsman assigned to men who needed a medic," he said softly. Pierce smiled through wet eyes. "You were Army, Art. I was whatever they needed when they were bleeding." That line broke something in the room. Not loudly. Quietly. The way truth often does when it finally arrives. Pierce looked toward the side hallway. "Who asked him to stay out of the photo?" No one answered. Caleb stepped forward. "I did, sir." Pierce studied him. The gym became painfully still. Caleb swallowed. "I thought he was maintenance staff." Arthur turned to him before Pierce could speak. "I am." Caleb looked confused. Arthur lifted the brass keys from his belt. "I am maintenance staff. I keep the lights working. I clean up after ball games. I shovel snow from the east steps. I unlock the doors when children come in from the cold." He looked back at Caleb. "These are honest keys. But a man can be more than the shirt you meet him in." Caleb lowered his eyes. "Yes, sir." Pierce released Arthur's hand and reached for the microphone stand. "I was scheduled to give a speech about service tonight. But I think the best lesson in service has been walking these halls for 41 years, and most of you called him Mr. Monroe without knowing what that name had carried." Arthur shook his head. "I didn't carry it alone." "No," Pierce said. "That is why you set 8 chairs." Arthur reached into his shirt pocket. His hand trembled as he unfolded the old paper. For the first time, the audience saw it. A small, yellowed field note. Soft with age. Split at the folds. Arthur looked at the chairs. I wrote these names in a hospital tent because I was afraid the rain would take them from my head. The gym was so quiet that the rustle of the paper reached the front row. Pierce stepped aside. Arthur did not want the microphone. But Jacob, without being asked, moved the stand down to Arthur's height. Arthur looked at the boy. "Thank you." Jacob nodded, eyes bright. Arthur began to read. Corporal Daniel Hurst. A veteran in the second row stood. Specialist Raymond Pike. Another veteran stood. Private Luis Moreno. A teacher began to cry. Sergeant James Weller. The principal bowed his head. Private First Class Aaron Bell. Pierce closed his eyes. Corporal Thomas Avery. The choir director lowered her music folder. Specialist Henry Colson. A student in the back wiped his face with his sleeve. And Private Michael Reeves. Arthur folded the paper. Those were the men who did not come home from Crow Valley. He looked at the 8 chairs. They were 19, 20, 21. One of them had a daughter he never met. One wanted to open a repair shop. One sang so badly we begged him to stop, then missed his voice when he was gone. No one laughed. Arthur looked at his scarred hands. I have cleaned this gym for a long time. People sometimes ask why I never retired. The truth is, I liked unlocking doors. A locked door is a hard thing when you know what it feels like to be trapped. Pierce lowered his head. Arthur's voice stayed quiet. I could not bring those boys home the way I wanted. So I learned to take care of places where boys and girls still had a chance to grow old. The gym broke then. Not with applause. With silence that had weight. Then the old Marine in the second row stood straighter and raised his hand to salute. One by one, the other veterans rose. Then the teachers. Then the students. Not all saluted. Some placed hands over hearts. Some simply stood. Arthur stared at them, overwhelmed. He had faced artillery with steadier knees. Pierce leaned close. Let them stand, Art. Caleb stepped away from the stage and walked to the photo area. He picked up a chair and carried it to the center of the front row. Then he looked at Arthur. Sergeant Monroe, he said, voice rough, this seat should have been yours from the start. Arthur looked at the chair. Then at Caleb. I was fine where I was. Caleb shook his head. I wasn't. That answer landed deeper than an apology. Arthur sat slowly, not in the center like a man claiming honor, but carefully, as if sitting for the 8 men who could not. The program changed after that. The mayor did not give her prepared remarks. The school board president folded his speech in half and put it away. The choir sang, America the Beautiful, and by the second verse half the gym was singing with them. When it was over, Pierce returned to the microphone. I want the official photograph taken again, he said. The photographer lifted his camera. Pierce pointed to Arthur. With him in the center. Arthur immediately shook his head. No, Pierce smiled. Still giving orders, Sergeant. I'm refusing bad ones. That drew a warm laugh from the room. Pierce looked at the 8 empty chairs. Then not for you. For them. Arthur's smile faded. That he could not refuse. The veterans gathered again. This time they did not arrange themselves by title, rank, office, or donor level. They formed around Arthur Monroe, who stood awkwardly in his custodian shirt with his keys still hanging from his belt. Before the camera flashed, Jacob stepped forward. Mr. Monroe. Arthur looked at him. Jacob held out the mop bucket he had moved from the hallway. Should I move this out of the picture? Arthur looked at the bucket. Then at the boys and girls in the choir. Then at the men standing around him. No, he said. Leave it. The photographer hesitated. Pierce nodded. Leave it. So the picture was taken with generals, board members, veterans, students, a custodian, a ring of brass keys, and a mop bucket in the corner. Years later, that photograph would hang in the front hall of Linden County High School. Students would stop and ask why the mop bucket was there. Teachers would tell them. They would say it was there because a mop in an old soldier's hands did not make him less of a soldier. It only proved he had never stopped serving. After the ceremony, the gym slowly emptied. Families went home. Chairs were folded. The sound system was unplugged. Flags were returned to their stands. Arthur stayed behind, as he always did. He picked up paper cups from beneath the bleachers and stacked programs left on seats. Pierce found him near the 8 chairs. "You're still working," the general said. Arthur did not look up. "Gym won't clean itself." Pierce stood beside him. "For 54 years, I wondered what happened to you." Arthur placed a cup into the trash bag. "I was here. I should have found you sooner." Arthur looked at the empty chairs. "You had a life to live. So did you." Arthur smiled faintly. "I did. Just quieter." Pierce watched him for a long moment. Then he said, "I have carried guilt for Crow Valley most of my life." Arthur stopped moving. "That belongs to the war," he said. "Not to you." Pierce's eyes filled. "I became a general because men kept telling me I was brave." Arthur turned to him. "You were." "No," Pierce said. "I was wounded and afraid." "You were brave." Arthur looked down at his hands. "I was afraid too." That surprised Pierce more than anything else Arthur had said. Arthur tied the trash bag closed. "Courage isn't not being afraid, Nate. Courage is having someone call your name and answering anyway." Pierce nodded slowly. Then Arthur reached into his pocket and took out the old paper with the 8 names. He held it for a moment. "I think I can stop carrying this now." Pierce looked at him. Arthur walked to the 8 chairs and placed the paper on the center one. "Not as a display. Not for cameras. Just as a man." Setting down a weight. Pierce did not speak. He knew better. The next morning, when students arrived, the 8 chairs were still there. So was the paper. Beside it, someone had placed a small handwritten sign. "These men are present when we remember them." No one admitted writing it. Arthur unlocked the front doors at 6:15, like always. Jacob was waiting outside with 2 coffees. One black. One with too much cream. Arthur looked at him. "You lost?" Jacob shook his head. "I wanted to help set up chairs for the assembly." "There is no assembly today." Jacob smiled. "Then I'll help anyway." Arthur studied the boy for a moment. Then he opened the door wider. Inside, the hallway lights hummed on, 1 row at a time. Arthur handed Jacob the smaller ring of keys. "Start with the east wing." Jacob took them carefully, as if they were more than keys. Maybe they were. Maybe they had always been. Arthur watched him walk down the hall, then looked toward the photograph already being prepared for the front display case. For most of his life, he had believed being unseen was the price of surviving. But that morning, as the school filled with footsteps, voices, lockers, and the living noise of children with futures, Arthur Monroe understood something he had not allowed himself to believe. The boys from Crow Valley had not vanished. They had been carried. In his hands. In his keys. In every door he opened. And now, finally, in the memory of people who would say their names after he was gone.